Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Glad you could join me. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, PASreport.com. I have a great guest coming on because right now in America, it seems that the bureaucracy is totally out of control, that it abuses its power regularly, and there's zero accountability within the system. It's why I want to talk to J. Michael Waller, who is the author of Big Intel, How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. Thank you so much for coming on the program. How are you today?
Doing great, Nick.
Well, I'm glad you could be on. Your book is fascinating. I have links up at the PAS report so everyone can check it out. Buy a copy. You need to read this book because it really goes through some of the most dangerous elements to the intelligence community today. And my first question in the book, you talk about how the FBI and the CIA became tools of a growing police state, right? I mean, that's what it seems. And can you explain to the audience how it happened?
It happened very gradually. It took decades, it took generations to happen. Basically, the FBI was set up to fight Marxist subversives and anarchists and foreign-born terrorists. When J. Edgar Hoover started it up, those were the problems that he was facing, as well as gangsters. So it went from that and from assisting local law enforcement to a growing bureaucracy, as bureaucracies do. They get mission creep. And now it's fighting all kinds of activity and citizens at the local level. And since it's no longer, two things, since it's no longer politically correct to go after jihadists, and since so many of the jihadists were wiped out years ago, the FBI started looking for other enemies. And those enemies are people like you and me.
Yeah, it really is concerning, especially when we look at the FBI Department of Justice School Board memo, when you look at the whole FBI memo regarding traditional Catholics and that those that have faith and simply disagree on policy issues now could be labeled domestic terrorists. And one of the really big concerning things is something that a lot of people didn't pay attention to. It was the President Biden and his administration released the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, where it says anyone that expresses anti-government or anti-authority sentiment can be classified as a potential domestic terrorist, not anti-American sentiment. You could bash the United States all day long. You could call for its collapse. But how frightening is it when you have the bureaucrats in power that believe that they get to determine what the political debates and the narratives are?
Right. And imagine how far this has gone from the founding fathers, who were also anti-government, not just anti-British government. They were anti-central government. That's what the whole Federalist Papers discussion was all about, is how much government should we have? It's a necessary evil. But now if you speak out against government abuse, you're being classified as anti-government and therefore a public menace and a violent extremist.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, when you look at the founding fathers, and not just the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, like the one thing that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists agreed on was the dangers of an ever-growing government and the abuse of power. Now, in your book, you state that it stems to the Frankfurt School of Thought. Can you explain to the audience what the Frankfurt School is and when it began to play into the CIA and ultimately the FBI after that?
What became the Frankfurt School, which means it was based at Goethe University as a school in Frankfurt, Germany. So it's called the Frankfurt School for short. It began at a 1924 meeting in Moscow with the head of the Cheka, which became the KGB, and the heads of the communist parties around the world, and the Soviet Kremlin leadership. Remember, the Bolshevik Revolution had just taken place 5 years before. The Kremlin leadership that was running the international communist movement. And they decided that, it was 1922, it was 5 years after the Bolshevik Revolution. They decided that they couldn't replicate the Bolshevik Revolution in Western countries. So they would have to do it a different way. And they would use subversion. They would undermine confidence and belief in traditions, in values, in the Judeo-Christian ethics, even in the Greco-Roman basis of republics and democracies, all of that stuff, down to the nuclear family. And it would all have to be destroyed. And only then could an organized movement come in and take over the institutions and have their revolutions. So what became the Frankfurt School began at that 1922 meeting in Moscow. It was moved to Frankfurt, Germany, set up there, and then took advantage of the polarization of Germany to try to tear it down. They actually inadvertently helped the rise of Hitler.
And when did it begin to get imported to the United States?
Right at that time, right at Hitler's rise, he was going to go after them like he was going to go after everybody else. So a number of the Frankfurt School leaders moved to different parts of Europe, and a group with the assistance of Soviet intelligence set up shop at Columbia University.
There's a lot of talk about Columbia University lately, and a lot of people don't know this, but Columbia University, even back then, they wouldn't allow Jews on its main campus. They actually relegated them to a campus in Brooklyn because they were Jewish. So you see the anti-Semitism that plays on even from back then and what they're allowing today. But when we look at the United States, so we see the Frankfurt School being imported into the United States. Obviously, you see the feminist movement going on, 60s, 70s, the Vietnam anti-war demonstrations go on. But it seems over the last 20 years that the Marxists have actually made inroads, right? Prior to that, Marxism was not successful in the United States because, let's face it, actual Marxism was the workers' class, right? Workers rebel against the leadership. And Americans generally live good lives, right? I mean, if you're in the middle class families, you were living well. And so they couldn't have the worker rebellion. So then they turned to race over the course of the last 20 years, it seems. And they've been impactful with that. Would you agree with that assessment?
Right. And that was the whole point. Workers had hope. Even poor people had hope in America and other Western societies. It's where you don't have hope, where you have workers' revolutions. So they thought, how can we create and exacerbate tensions where either there aren't any or they're there and nothing's being done adequately to help it? How can we make things worse? And one of the things was race baiting. So this is where the Marxism, the economic Karl Marx, the workers against the wealthy bourgeoisie, switched to the cultural Karl Marx from before he wrote the Communist Manifesto, cultural Marxism, to attack culture. So everybody's a victim. Every grievance group is, except the Jews, of course. Everybody's a victim. And therefore, everybody should unite together as victims to fight their oppressors, which is white, patriarchal, Judeo-Christian society. So that's what cultural Marxism is. The Frankfurt School refined this into political theory, philosophy, called critical theory. So this is where we get critical race theory, just as you pointed out on the race issue, critical law theory to weaponize American law for preconceived ends. So you don't use it to uphold the Constitution. You use the Constitution as a tool to wage Marxist revolution and so forth. That all comes out of the Frankfurt School.
Cultural Marxism is extremely concerning, particularly here in the United States. And I want to talk to you more about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you prepared for the unexpected? As a former emergency manager, being prepared is not a choice, it's a necessity, and that's where the Wellness Company comes in. Imagine having the peace of mind that you're equipped to handle any medical crisis, from tick bites to the latest pandemic. The Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is your lifeline, packed with essential medications like ivermectin, emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and more. This kit is your ultimate preparedness solution. The Wellness Company's team of renowned medical professionals, including Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and more. They are truth-seeking doctors, and they have designed a kit that sets the gold standard for safety and prevention. Don't wait for the next crisis to strike. Visit twc.health/PAS and use promo code PAS for an exclusive 10% discount just for being a listener of this show. Prepare today, rest easy tomorrow. Use code PAS at checkout. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with J. Michael Waller, author of Big Intel. So we left off with cultural Marxism, and the reason I think it's so dangerous, particularly here in the United States, is because it's the one place where cultural Marxism can really make a difference. America is not one unified culture. We don't have 2,000 years of a shared history together. We don't have common traditions, shared ethnicity, shared languages, and so it really becomes a problem. We're a hodgepodge of all these different peoples, and if you divide us on race and ethnicity, you could essentially destroy the United States, turning us into a tribal society similar to what we see in other parts of the world. And we could see the inroads that they've made here in the United States. The question is, why are they doing it?
To take us down. Think of what a great experiment the United States was and still is, where people can come from around the world and become Americans. Of course, you're supposed to abjure any allegiance to your old country and your old society and your old leadership. That's been done away with. So you have dual loyalties now. You can bring your culture, you can keep your culture, but you assimilate as Americans. But they were doing away with Americanization of immigrants back in the 1960s and 70s. They abolished it. So think of how long ago that was and how contaminated our country has become with this influx of, Sharia law in America.
Yeah. Well, now it's we can't force assimilation because assimilation is racist, right? The whole melting pot theory is a racist concept made up by white people. So now it must be that America must bow to the cultures that are coming here, correct?
Right. And that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion are all about.
It's such a scam. I'm in academia, right? And we're forced to now you have to have diversity, equity, inclusion degree requirements as if it's an academic discipline, but it's not. It's such a fraud on the American people. However, it has been successful, and I'll admit that, right? I mean, that we can't deny. It's been successful at dividing America, even if we look at President Biden's recent speech from Morehouse College. It was truly disgraceful as he pits Black Americans against white Americans, against Hispanic Americans. Truly disgraceful. When we look at this attempt, what makes them think that they could actually succeed? And what I mean by that is we've seen communism, Marxism fail every single place it's been implemented in. There's not a single success story that you could point to. What makes these bureaucrats think that they could succeed once this agenda is implemented here in the United States?
Their success is their revolution. What comes afterward is really of no concern. It's a new class system that they're building of a permanent, centralized, unaccountable, anonymous administrative state that controls now economic transactions, that now through technology is going to monitor every single thing we buy, every single loan we take, every single bill we have, our spending behaviors, our consumer preferences, everything, and then credit that or discredit that against us as a system of control. So the success doesn't mean prosperity. The success means control.
And that's what it comes down to when we look at it. And it's control over every aspect of our lives. So we know the CIA is involved. We know the FBI has been infiltrated. What about the National Security Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and other components of our intelligence units out there?
Sure. Just look at what they do on social media, how they're recruiting. They're recruiting the wokest, most extreme elements of society. They're not looking for mainstream people. They're not even looking for diverse people. Let's say we need rainbow flag militants in our forces so that we can understand those communities and work with those communities. I kind of understand that logic. I don't agree with that logic, but that's not the logic. The logic is we want to march through the institutions as we have, we meaning the cultural Marxists. We've taken over the Ford Foundation and the Tides Foundation and the other big MacArthur and Rockefeller foundations and so forth. We've taken over universities and media, so many churches, entertainment, all these other things, and they're now doing it to the government. So you don't see them attacking the FBI anymore because they've taken it over. You don't see them attacking the CIA anymore because they've taken that over. Look what they're doing to our military. They don't want the best recruits possible. That's why the military has to keep lowering its standards. They want revolutionary Red Guard type cadres.
When you put it that way, it really does explain a lot. I mean, are you telling me that, the purple-haired people aren't going to be good agents that, are able to get assets in other countries to help us advance our foreign policy when it comes to these countries?
Well, the purple-haired types will be good at relating to other purple-haired types, but why would you want them? Look at what the State Department is doing this week. What the NATO alliance is doing this week. They have some sort of anti-homophobia, biphobia, transphobia day or week or month or whatever it is, leading up to Pride Month, of course. And the Secretary General of NATO just said NATO's purpose is to defend this stuff. I never knew that. I don't think there's any consensus around that. The State Department is pushing this as a diplomatic initiative globally, and it's been doing it, since Obama, at least, even earlier. Think of how this plays into Putin's hands. and Xi Jinping's hands when they go to these different countries and they say, we want to have transactional relations with you, and we're not going to force weird culture down your throats. We're just going to, have transactional relations as a state-to-state relationship would. And by the way, we'll give you lots of free stuff. And the unspoken agenda is we'll take you over, but we're not going to wreck your culture.
Well, and that's
The
such
United States and the West are destroying culture worldwide.
and that's such a good point, because if you look at the last 4 years alone, particularly the last four under Biden, you see a lot of our allies, even though they weren't the greatest of allies, but you see us pushing a lot of them into the umbrella of the BRIC nations, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, particularly Brazil, which this administration helped Lula get elected and get Bolsonaro out. And Lula has done everything once in power to undermine the United States and our power and authority. And you look at countries like China, they don't care if you're a free country that has this idea of democracy. They don't care if you're an authoritarian country. As you stated perfectly, it's transactional. They just sit there and they look at the transactions of what's in their interest. What has gone wrong in the Western world where you see us essentially committing suicide on the global stage? Western civilization is destroying itself. It's intentional. We see it. But the question is, why? What do they want to govern over? Even though they have that control, do they really want to control third world country, turn us into third world country and control that?
I don't think they even go that far. They're so in their little hermetically sealed bubble that their entire philosophy is in their pants. Everything they're pushing is in their pants, and they're pushing this on the whole world with this rainbow flaggery and sanctioning officials for being transphobic. Really, a phobia is a mental illness. It's an irrational fear of something. So they're like the Soviets did. They're diagnosing people who politically or culturally disagree. They're diagnosing them as mentally ill, and they're making that a policy that they're forcing on all of us. So this allows Putin and Xi Jinping to say, we're not going to do that stuff to you. Just build good relations with us and we'll have good relations. And that's why even NATO allies like Hungary have gravitated toward Russia, because they're seeing what the EU is doing and what the United States is pushing. And they're saying, we want to be part of NATO, but we don't want to be part of this cultural destruction.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It is cultural destruction. Now, it was more hidden prior to 2001. 9/11 attacks happen. You see the Patriot Act quickly get passed. It was about a month and a half, which is like record time for such a consequential piece of legislation to get passed. A few years after that, we started to see the abuses, right? You had the PRISM program from the NSA that was collecting the metadata on every American. We saw the IRS targeting Tea Party groups. We saw that banks were getting more involved in social issues. Prior to that, community involvement meant building a YMCA somewhere to give back to the community. Now they're going to take social stands on issues. But what really opened my eyes was in 2014. You had the CIA, something that you are very familiar with, given you are someone from the inside. You had the CIA get caught spying on sitting members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. The Intelligence Committee, the members feigned their outrage, right? They screamed, you can't do this, it's illegal. They feigned their outrage. Now, the Senate Intelligence Committee has the power of oversight. They could rein in these abuses from these agencies. They could penalize these agencies. In your opinion, why do you think that the Senate did nothing? I mean, they feigned their outrage, great, but they didn't do anything to prevent it from happening again. In fact, they keep on empowering the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the NSA, even more.
Yeah, and some of the outrage wasn't even feigned. It was genuine outrage. Think of it, though. You have elected senators whose constitutional role is to oversee the intelligence community, to be that balance, that check and balance. They're afraid. I've talked to a number of congressmen and senators, and so have a lot of other ones, a lot of other people on Capitol Hill, and they look at this and they say, we don't dare to take this on. And if you remember, your senator, Chuck Schumer, not yours, but I mean, one who represents your area, he, in 2017, he said, if Trump goes after the intelligence communities, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Now put aside for the fact that it's Schumer, think of the profoundness of that statement, that here the highest ranking senator in the United States says that no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, a senator or a president, if you go after the intelligence community, they will take you down. That's what a deep state is. That's a state within a state. This is a rogue, not just agency, a rogue intelligence community of 18 different agencies and the huge industrial complex behind it, and the compromised politicians and journalists that have been built up over the decades, telling senators, you cannot tell us what to do. You cannot penalize us with our budget. You cannot reorganize us. You cannot hold us accountable for committing felony after felony almost every single day, or we'll take you down.
That interview with Rachel Maddow always stuck out at me because here you have one of the highest ranking Democrat senator who is sitting there and he's warning Trump. It's not like he was being an a-hole. He's warning him, hey, if you go after the intelligence community, they're going to come back at you. They're going to take you down. He's giving a warning. Rachel Maddow's laughing. I don't know why she's laughing. She should be terrified and she should have expressed concern. At that point, we have to admit that we've lost control of the bureaucracy. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, I want to talk about how we rein the beast back in. Everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm talking to J. Michael Waller, author of Big Intel. Links up at the P.A.S. report website, PASreport.com. Now, the question is, how do we rein in this bureaucracy? It's obviously out of control. We see it. How do we begin to rein it in? There are some people that say that the White House must assume more command over the bureaucrats and the bureaucracy. But is that really the way to solve the problem? Or whether it's a Biden administration or Trump administration, wouldn't it just make it worse? Because whoever the president is following that can always turn it around. What's your thoughts on that?
It can solve the problem because bureaucrats at the end of the day, they just want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their security clearances. They want to keep their heads down so they can get in there 25 years or whatever each agency requires, get their pension, keep their clearances, and then go into the private sector as contractors doing their old job for twice the money. That's what they want. So if you threaten that with disruption, they're going to fight you tooth and nail. So that's one element that's out there of the swamp. That's what Trump was referring to when he was talking about the swamp. We have to get rid of that because this then becomes an industry, like Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. There's an intelligence-industrial complex, and these former officials are making huge amounts of money off the American taxpayer. You go down to the Washington, D.C. area, you'll find that 9 of the 20 wealthiest counties in America are in the greater D.C. area. Yet D.C. has no industry. It has no port. It's not a banking center. Its business model is taking money from the taxpayer and borrowing it for future taxpayers to repay to enrich themselves in these nice, wealthy, comfortable communities that are all societies. These are networks of friends, networks of cronies. They're always scratching each other's back. If you have a president who comes in and threatens that, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get at you.
Yeah, and we know people that have faced the wrath of the FBI. And I'm not talking about, we all know what happened to former President Trump, but I'm talking about FBI agents like Garrett O'Boyle, Steve Friend, and what the FBI has viciously done to them to make them examples of, if you dare speak out, if you dare become a whistleblower against our agency, we will take you down. We will destroy your livelihood. And they've been successful at instilling fear to anyone that might think about speaking out against these abuses from internally within the agencies, correct?
Right. They want to set examples. They want to make public humiliation of these people and hold them up to destroy them. That's why you don't have more whistleblowers coming out. What these whistleblowers who you mentioned, Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend and Kyle Seraphin's and other, there are several of them. They didn't commit any crimes. They've been suspended from the FBI. They were not fired, meaning they still work for the Bureau in terms of being in the system, which means that the Bureau is not allowing them to get other forms of employment. The Bureau is deliberately impoverishing them, saying, nope, you're only suspended. We're not going to let you quit, and we're not going to fire you. We're just going to wreck your lives.
And they're not going to pay you.
No. In fact, take away your health insurance. And in the case of Garrett O'Boyle, just before they suspended him, they transferred him and his young family from one part of the country to the other. And then they kept all of his property in storage. So when winter comes, his children's winter clothes were in storage. He wasn't allowed to access any of that. Then the Bureau sent him a bill for transferring him.
It really shows you
the government pays the expense, not in the case of Garrett O'Boyle. And one of the common points that all of these whistleblowers have is extraordinary personal character, courage, principle, strong belief in God, strong belief in family, meaning the people with the strongest character are the whistleblowers. It's not the sleazebags and the weaklings and the people with grudges. It's these strong people. So the Bureau is trying to purge out people with character and bring in the crazies to run the show.
Yeah, it's disgraceful, right? I mean, that's what it is. When you see that over a 2 year period, I think it's something like over 4,000 federal employees were suspended for at least 1 month, but they still received their pay. One person at the Department of Homeland Security was suspended 760 days in a 3 year period with pay, and yet they destroy people like Garrett O'Boyle. It really, really makes me sick. But in your book, you lay out that there is a path. Like, we can dismantle these structures that exist. It's not impossible. So can you give the audience just a brief way of what government needs to do? I'm talking about our elected representatives need to do to begin to dismantle the system, but also the role that ordinary Americans play, because we still have at least for now, we still have a voice in this system if we exercise it. So what could be done to dismantle this?
Well, first, when we think of dismantling, we should keep in mind that we need a federal investigative service for investigating federal crimes, for assisting states where the states might be small or poor or don't have the resources, for enforcing laws related to interstate commerce. That's constitutional, and that's fine. We certainly need a federal agency to fight foreign spies, and so many other things. But you don't need the FBI as it is anymore. We still need a Department of War. Remember, the Department of War won World War II for us, but it was abolished right after World War II. Everything was reorganized and a new Department of Defense was created, which served us very well until recently. So we can't get attached to brand names. FBI brand, all it is a brand that J. Edgar Hoover built. Otherwise it's simply a bureaucracy, and it's scary to see. Well, first, the good people who are still in the FBI, but the inept and malicious and politically driven crazies who are there in the Bureau, especially in the nerve center that's running the management. So let's just take the FBI, break it apart piece by piece. Think of it as a Trump real estate project where you have old, obsolete buildings. Well, you still need buildings, you still need services. Let's make better ones. Let's take down what's there in an orderly way and put something in its place. So in this
And do you
case,
think the intel component with something like a federal law enforcement needs to be removed? The intelligence component there, where, obviously the CIA, we understand the intel component, even though they're supposed to operate overseas, that, looking at American citizens and senators. But with the FBI, a lot of it has to do with the intel function, intel powers they gained after 9/11, correct?
That's a big part of it, because when you have a federal law enforcement agency, it's there to enforce the law, but it's also an intelligence service that operates under a different set of laws. Then you have now a domestic intelligence service with police powers. That's what communist secret police systems are. We don't want to head that way.
And we are. And that's the scary part. Everyone, we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, I want to talk to you about what ordinary citizens can do, what role we play. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back.
First of all, what the other side wants us to do is to get demoralized, to get depressed, to feel isolated, to feel hopeless. No, we can't do that, because when Donald Trump went in last time, he didn't understand the nature of the problem. Almost nobody on his team understood the nature of the problem. And he just thought if you just switch the people on top like a company, then the problem will fix itself. And of course, that didn't happen. So now he really has a team. He's got, it's still in the course of being put together, but it's people who really do understand the problem. There are still disagreements, but they're all, 90% together on it. So that's very important. He's going to need to have executive orders written. These are what every president does when he first comes into office, to make the government pursue the policies that he was elected to pursue, or what he wants to pursue. Trump didn't really undo most of Obama's executive orders. Biden did undo most of Trump's executive orders. So he needs to go in armed with a lot of executive orders to repeal the bad stuff that's there, amend it, and then to put in his own. He's going to be doing that too. So he needs a lot of public support to do that. And he's still wavering on whether or not to save the FBI. He recently came out with a statement saying that we need to build a big, beautiful new FBI headquarters in downtown DC as what he called the centerpiece of renewing our nation's capital. The public needs to say, hey, we love you, but that's not That's not what we want to vote for.
Go to
So,
Alabama.
Yeah,
They'll
go to
get
Alabama
there.
at best. Yes, but at least exactly, you've got the idea. So, and by moving it to a place like Alabama, a lot of the bad elements will quit because they want to be near the center of power. So that's another thing that we need to really support any presidential candidate who's going to do this. I have to be bipartisan about it, given where I work. So you've got that. And then the other issue is, and it's not so much in New York because New York has a weak system of sheriffs, but in parts of the country where the sheriffs are strong, the public votes for the sheriff as the highest ranking local law enforcement leaders in their counties. And so they're accountable directly to the public. But they have a constitutional role where they can limit or even deny support to federal agencies to come into their areas to do work, whether it's the FBI or ATF or any other agencies. If the sheriff says, what you're doing is unjust, what you're doing is corrupt, what you're doing is unconstitutional, we're not going to help you. That will really curtail FBI abuses because the FBI needs sheriffs and local law enforcement as its eyes and ears. So locally elected law enforcement can deny that to them. That's where the average citizen has a real stake in the matter. And really, that's our last line of defense.
It's a great point. And do you think Congress, not saying they will, right? There's a difference between do they and whether they have the will to do it. Do you think Congress is the one that ultimately should play the biggest role in trying to start to curtail, limit the powers and functions of these agencies and departments, start to downsize them? Again, whether they have the will to do that, that's a completely different question. But do you think they have the power to do it? And that's the best avenue to go down? Because let's face it, even if Trump does 1 million executive orders, well, the next president could undo those executive orders, as you stated. So do you think ultimately Congress has to take a proactive role and actually demonstrate statesmanship instead of cowardice?
Yeah, now that's a lot to ask, but yes, it's possible to do, or it's there to do. First, Congress's constitutional role is power of the purse. They can fund or defund anything they want. They can slash budgets if they want to. They can do investigations if they want to. But the thing is that the Republicans have not allocated enough investigators the way the Democrats do when they're in power. So where they're talking about bringing back a Frank Church type committee from the 1970s to investigate everything. Well, that committee that was a bipartisan Senate committee. It had over 130 staffers, investigators, and attorneys. The House version of it today has 5. So Congress can get serious about that. And the other thing is oversight. If you bring in the FBI and say, let's say, for example, like Senator Ted Cruz asked, and other senators have asked the FBI director and other top FBI officials time and again, were FBI agents or assets involved in any way in the planning and execution of criminal acts of violence at the United States Capitol on January 6th? Yes or no? The FBI wouldn't say.
No comment.
Yet Congress didn't penalize it. They should have said, until we get answers from you, we're going to slash your budget 30%. So with power of the purse, Congress can tell the FBI, if you don't answer our questions, we're going to slash your budget. We're going to put restrictions on what you can and cannot do. We can cut you 5%, 10%, 30%. We can cut you 1% a day for as long as you don't answer the questions. Congress can do these things. It just doesn't want to.
It's such a good point. And the Congress actually did that with the IRS years ago. After the Lois Lerner scandal, they did cut their budgets, and it was a punishment for what the IRS did. So there are avenues to remedy the situation. Let's just hope we have people in power that have the will to do exactly that. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll slip into the authoritarianism and the Orwellian dystopia that it seems we've been living through the last 3 years. J. Michael Wool, I really appreciate you coming on. Everyone needs to check out Big Intel, how the CIA and FBI went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. Thank you so much for joining me.
It was great to be with you, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.